Hello everyone. I hope that everything works. I welcome all of you to our first live event topic, whale sharks in the Galapagos Islands. First, before we start, we would like to introduce the chat function that should is you ask questions to talk. You
I give you and you introduce yourself, your life.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. Just a few technical issues. Technology is wonderful when it works. Firstly, thanks for joining us on what is probably a beautiful Sunday afternoon, possibly a Sunday evening for so many of you, and also on Father's Day. So happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. I feel a little bit bad that in some ways people are inside when they should be outside on a beautiful day. But I hope that many of you have joined us because of the interest that's been shown, especially recently, about the whale sharks in Galapagos and about the research that we've been carrying out for quite a while. So firstly, to introduce myself, my name is Jonathan Green, and I'm the director of the Galapagos Whale Shark Project and co-funder of the project. And this project started quite a while ago. As you can see from the name, we are based in the Galapagos Islands, and we're working with a team of scientists from around the world that are working in many locations around the world. Very briefly, I know a lot of you have joined us on talks before. Some of you are new and are joining us for the first time. So I'll try and give you some history which covers what for some of you is already known, but for many of you perhaps is new. So Galapagos, I think everybody knows about the Galapagos Islands. Not everyone knows exactly where they are. If you put the question to most audiences, tell me something about the Galapagos, they'll probably come up with giant tortoises, possibly volcanoes, and of course Charles Darwin. So the famous journey that was made in 1835 by Charles Darwin, a 5-year journey on HMS Beagle, and he traveled through the Galapagos Islands as one of the many destinations that he went to. It wasn't a eureka moment, if you like, so Charles Darwin didn't get to the islands and say, this is evolution. This was a long process, but it was partly because of his observations in the Galapagos and the particularly unique species that are found there, that years later he then wrote about the origin of species, the theory of evolution, and the idea of natural selection being the mechanism behind it. So a lot of the species in Galapagos are totally unique. About 40% of all the animals and the plants that you find there are actually endemic or unique to the islands. This is the only blood-sucking finch that we know of in the world. It is the vampire finch, which exists in 2 tiny northernmost islands, and they do actually suck blood in order to survive. Why is it that the boobies let them do this? Because probably it was symbiosis, a symbiotic relationship beforehand, where the finches were actually removing ticks from the mast boobies, or the Nazca boobies rather, and so they allow them to do that, but they don't realize now that the finches have learned to pull out some of the small feathers which are just growing, and that way they allow blood to flow freely, and they can survive through periods of drought just by drinking the blood. So quite a unique behavior. The islands, of course, are both tropical and temperate, so the influences of the oceanic currents are huge, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But you see tropical species as well as what you would consider to be more temperate or perhaps even subpolar or polar species. So one of the few places in the world where you can look at pink flamingos in a lagoon, swim with penguins and sea lions, and see tropical fish from the Southern Ocean or the South Pacific, for example. And one of the few places you can actually swim and snorkel comfortably with penguins. As I mentioned, a lot of the species are unique. A lot of them have evolved in the islands, such as this one, the Flightless Cormorant, and the famous marine iguana, the only true marine lizard in the world. These iguanas have adapted from a land life foraging probably in the intertidal zone, and then going down, eventually becoming very good swimmers, going out into quite deep waters at times, because they're often found between 10 and 30 meters, feeding on algae which grows on the rocks around the area. So mentioning a number of the unique species. Now, coming back to whale sharks, Darwin, when he was in Galapagos, intimated or understood that the oceans were hugely rich in this area, but obviously he wasn't able to visit them as we are today. So scuba opened up a whole new world. How do we spot them in the Galapagos? Well, there's a number of ways. Most people go on a liveaboard vessel and you head out to dive in the various different parts of the archipelago. Whale sharks are generally spotted only up in the northernmost islands on a regular basis. They're spotted occasionally around all of the archipelago. And this is how we find them. So if I can get this video to run, often you'll be out there swimming or just watching big schools of fish, and you discern perhaps a shadow behind those fish. When we're out there with the scientists, we might hear a rattle of an underwater shaker, and then you head out into the blue, hoping that the person that you're following or looking at is actually watching a whale shark. As you can see here, the whale shark actually turns physically towards the divers. These are some of the largest whale sharks on the planet. Their size can be in Galapagos anywhere between 10 to maybe 14 or 15 meters. So they're absolutely gigantic. To give you a reference, that's something the size of a small school bus. Generally, when we're with divers not doing silence, we keep a distance of at least 3 meters away from them, and they swim by, as you can see. They're quite curious and will often turn towards divers in the water and then swim on their way, continuing passively by. We get the question very frequently, how dangerous are whale sharks? They are not dangerous at all. These are very gentle animals. They're very placid. They get their name whale from their size. They are the world's biggest shark, the world's biggest fish. And although we have this discussion quite frequently, they are actually bigger, almost certainly, than Megalodon, the famous dinosaur shark that people think was probably the biggest ever shark to exist. It would seem that whale sharks are actually slightly bigger. Now, coming directly to whale shark investigation in the Galapagos Islands, I was lucky enough to go out to the islands at the end of the 80s and was diving there at the beginning of the 90s, working with the National Park as a dive master, as a naturalist in the Galapagos Islands, when I came face to face with my very first whale shark. I knew what it was, and I'd heard of various sightings in the islands, but I'd never seen one myself. But when you see something coming towards you out of the blue of that size, and you see the unique polka dot, white dotted patterns on it, you know that it's probably going to be a whale shark. So as one came by me and swam past, for me, I think that was an experience which is difficult to describe. It's certainly a life-changing experience. And I went back from that dive and started asking people, my colleagues, the dive masters there, scientists that were working in Galapagos, so what are the whale sharks doing in Galapagos? Where are they coming from? Where are they traveling to? Where do they give birth? Because whale sharks are what we call ovoviviparous. So they incubate the eggs internally and they give birth to live young. So we don't know where those young are being born. There are fewer than 40 sightings worldwide of neonates, of very, very tiny pups. So it's all of a mystery. It's a huge mystery. And when I asked these questions of my peers, of various scientists that were working there, the answers that came back were, well, we just don't know. And for me, that was something I couldn't fathom. How is it that we have these huge animals that are roaming around the oceans? They've existed on this planet for 70, 80, maybe even 90 million years. So they're a vestige of, or a leftover the era of the dinosaurs. So here is a living dinosaur living today on our planet. We can scuba dive with it, we can swim with them, we can snorkel with them in different parts of the oceans around the world, but we know nothing about them. So at that point, I began to talk to the various dive masters that were working Galapagos, and we started to gather basic information about them, where we saw them, how frequently, their size, and also to look at their sex as well, to see if we had males or females and what the population was made up of. Realizing some years later that this was not going to give us the information that we needed in order to be able to protect the species because we knew that they were only staying in Galapagos for a short period of time and then they were heading out into the high seas, where most species, unfortunately, are not protected. I then got together with a scientist who was working with the Darwin Foundation at the time and working with mostly toothy sharks and said, how about setting up a project where we study the whale shark too? Unfortunately, there was no funding from that institution at the time. The person that was organizing those studies said that the population of whale sharks in the Galapagos was so small, it wasn't worth studying, and there wasn't really a database that we could refer to. And obviously, we realized that there was a very large population. We just needed to study it in order to better understand it. So together with Dr. Alex Hearn, we founded the Galapagos Whale Shark Project, and then we started looking for funding. But it wasn't until a few years later, in 2010, 2011, that we were lucky enough to actually get funding to go ahead and set up satellite tagging. We realized that that was the technology we needed to actually better follow them and study them. So we started off looking at the sex, whether they were male or female. We were taking small biopsy samples, getting DNA to look at population dynamics. Photo identification is one of the best tools because it's non-invasive and we can take photographs of the whale sharks. And every diver can do that as part of citizen science, for example. And you can upload those photographs, those images, to a global data bank. Laser biometrics, so in order to study them or study their size, their overall length to see if they're growing, how fast they're growing, and so on. Satellite tagging, and we can use different types of technology which is available, spot tags, pat tags, splash tags, and I'll talk a little more about that later. Blood chemistry and ultrasound, which is a component that we've only just started really adding to the project itself and to the work that we're doing. But that gives us an idea of baseline health, and ultrasound specifically will help us discover whether or not these huge animals that are coming into the Galapagos are possibly pregnant. And so that's one of our main goals at the moment. And we also have an ongoing challenge, which is deep diving tags. So the tags that I mentioned earlier, satellite tags, unfortunately have a limit of about 2,000 meters. That's 2 kilometers of depth. Below that, they tend to implode, so we lose transmission and we lose all data. And we know that whale sharks dive through that barrier, the 2 kilometer depth barrier, which is extraordinary. An animal of this size diving to such depths, and that in itself asks a whole series of questions. Why are they diving so deep? What is the purpose? What are the benefits of diving so deep? And you've got to remember that this is a cold-blooded animal. So if they go down into very, very cold water, quickly they could become too cold, perhaps hypothermic, and this could be harmful to them. So cold water isn't necessarily one of the best areas for them to be in. So how long do they spend down at those depths, and what are they doing down there? And this is how deep diving tags could help us. Unfortunately, at present, the only ones that are commercially available, at least for us as scientists, possibly the military have all the hardware out there, but we don't have access to it. But we need tags that can go down to 5, 6, maybe as deep as 8 or 10,000 meters. So to the bottom of the Marianas Trench and the bottom of our oceans. So if any of you out there are listening right now and you like to play around with technology and you'd like a challenge, if anyone could come up with a tag that could go down deeper than 2,000 meters, there's a lot of scientists that would be really grateful, and I think we'd find some very, very fascinating data about the whale sharks if we could actually develop that kind of tag. So we were beginning to develop this tag. We have some colleagues who are working on these tags at the moment. Unfortunately, due to COVID, many things have been put on hold, and that was one of them. But who knows? Maybe in 2022 we'll take off with that part of the study again. Why study whale sharks? I get this question a lot. Why don't you just leave them alone? Why bother tag them? Why bother them at all? Unfortunately, whale sharks, which used to be a sustainable fisheries for many indigenous populations, small fishing communities that lived in coastal waters, they were probably catching smaller whale sharks and taking them for their skin, for their oil, and for their meat. Unfortunately, during the late 1980s and increasingly in the 1990s, they became a target for industrial fisheries, and of course bycatch of the industrial fisheries increased massively. And a lot of this fishing is unregulated, unreported, and potentially illegal. And this is going on in the high seas. And unfortunately, there isn't an authority, a single authority, that at the moment can control this. So whale sharks are being taken. We know that for a fact, at increasing numbers. What we don't know are those numbers. How many whale sharks are being taken a year? We don't know. But we have an idea of how many that could be, as we do have data coming out of certain parts of the world, which would indicate that increasingly there are targeted fisheries. Because of that, and because of the decrease in the numbers that are being cited, so sightings are often indicators of global population size. So let's say that you have in one part of Kenya 1,000 elephants are sighted or lions are sighted each year. If that then goes down to 900, then 700, then 500, then 300, you know something is happening to your population. And that is what is happening worldwide with whale sharks. The population sightings are decreasing, and we're seeing figures of possibly up to about 50% of whale sharks have decreased in the last 70 years. We don't know, though. We don't have enough data. We need to continue to study them. And that's why in 2016, the IUCN decreased their status or downgraded their status from threatened to endangered. So in other words, they're in a worse state than they were 10, 20 years ago. 2016, I believe it was, a group of scientists went in, reporters went in undercover into mainland China, and they made some pretty horrific discoveries that they suspected from a long time had been going on. This is one single processing plant, and as you can see from the fins that are there, a lot of those animals are whale sharks. We don't know how many of these plants exist throughout mainland China. Unfortunately, we don't have access to the data, but it's thought that there are probably hundreds, possibly thousands of such plants that exist that are dedicated to processing a lot of the large pelagic sharks, so great whites, tiger sharks, whale sharks, etc., etc. And in this single processing plant, it was estimated from some fairly hard figures that about 600 whale sharks had been processed during that period of 2016, 2017, in a single year, calendar year. So 600 whale sharks in a single processing plant. If you start extrapolating those figures, obviously it's a pretty horrific numbers that come out of that. Why are they being taken? They're being taken, unfortunately, for their fins, obviously, and they're used for trophies. And increasingly, as other sharks now are being totally depleted, because we're seeing some populations which are being driven almost to extinction and will go extinct if something does not happen over the next few years. So a lot of those sharks that traditionally were used for shark fin soup have now disappeared from the oceans, and so the industrial fisheries are resorting to taking other species such as whale sharks. And unfortunately, squalene oil, so oil that comes from sharks and from rays, is being used in a number of health products. Amongst them, for example, glucosamine tablets will often come with a small derivative, a squalene oil derivative. So you might be buying those because they're available on the shelves everywhere in the world. So if you're in the US and you go to Walgreens, or if you're in the UK and you go to Boots, or any chemist pretty much around the globe, you can find products that contain squalene oil. And people say, well, how can we help? What can we do as individuals? Just have a look at those products and make sure that you're not one of those people who is buying a product which is endangering wildlife, habitat destruction, etc., etc. So we can all make a difference. So what is it we know about whale sharks? Basically that they can grow to very huge sizes. The largest one ever measured was reported to be 18.3 meters in length, about 30 to 35 tons in weight. They're filter feeders, so although they have minute teeth, they have about 3,000 teeth, they feed by filtering plankton, fish larvae, coral eggs, a variety of crustaceans, and of course small fish. I mentioned earlier that they're ovoviviparous, so they give birth to live young, and we'll see how it is that we know that in just a moment. And their distribution is pretty much throughout all of the tropical and subtropical and even some temperate areas of the world's oceans. The only sea they're not found in is the Mediterranean. So here you can see where they exist more or less in that tropical, subtropical band of oceans, and they have actually been reported now as far north as up in the Azores and further north up in the United States. and they've been reported down in Tasmania, in the south of Tasmania, just recently in the last few years. And that could be an indicator of them extending their range as the global oceanic temperatures rise. So as a byproduct of global climate change, whale sharks could actually be extending their range. Good thing, bad thing, we don't know. We don't have enough data over a long enough period of time to actually know more about that. Those small crosses mark aggregations. Aggregations tend to be related to food. So you'll get, with a lunar phase, a large copepod crustacean hatching, for example. And so generally you get young juvenile males that are between about 6 to 8 meters in length, which are aggregating in these different parts of the world, and they're going in there to feed. What we don't know, though, is where they're aggregating to breed. Because there is one single species, Rhynchodontypus, around the entire world and throughout all of the oceans, we know that genetically all of those oceans, so the Pacific, the Atlantic, and the Indian Ocean, are all connected. Their DNA is connected, they're genetically connected, which means that they must be traveling around the globe in order to meet and to mate. Otherwise, there would be speciation, and we'd see different species cropping up around the oceans. So what we don't know? Well, we don't know very much about them. Their global population size and structure. How many individuals are there out there? We don't know. Where they reproduce, we're getting indicators that they might be birthing in certain areas because neonates are being spotted, but we still don't know absolutely what are the areas that they're giving birth in and where those pups are living. So the young, the neonates are called pups. They're generally born between about 55 and 75 centimeters. So we're looking at just under 2 feet to just over 3 feet in length when they're born. But generally we don't see whale sharks until they're about 4 meters, 5 meters, 6 meters in length. So where are they living until they reach that age? Again, that's another mystery. And we don't know their migratory movements. So where are they traveling exactly? What are the routes, the paths that they take as they cross the oceans, going from perhaps their breeding grounds to their feeding grounds? We just don't know at this moment, and that's what we're trying to find out. The study site that we're working at this moment, and we have been working since 2005, is at the very, very northern part of the Galapagos, Darwin Arch. The Galapagos platform, as you might know, is an oceanic platform that rises up because of volcanic activity. It's associated with what's called a mantle plume. So beneath the oceanic crust, you have magma upwelling, and then it creates submarine volcanoes, which has built up this huge platform. And that rises out of about 3,500 meters of water, or 10,000 feet. So this is an ideal area to study them. And most of the sightings, over 90% of all sightings in the Galapagos, are found up at Darwin Arch in the very north of the archipelago. One of the most useful tools that we have for whale shark identification and for understanding their movements around the globe is the Wild Book for Whale Sharks. So anybody out there that goes snorkeling, swimming, or diving with whale sharks, if you could take photographs of the whale sharks, and I'll show specifically the areas that we're interested in, you can go on Wild Book and you can upload those photographs, and we can use those because the dots are just like the fingerprint of a human being. They're unique to the animal, they remain unique throughout its lifespan, and we can use that then to track them as they move around the globe, or to see the frequency of how often they return to a particular site area, the site fidelity. So they might be in the Galapagos in Darwin in 2007, and we've had them return in 2012, or we've had sightings as late as 2017, a 12-year sighting of one animal. So this information, everybody out there who enjoys swimming, diving, snorkeling with whale sharks can help. And that's not only with whale sharks, of course. That applies to rays, manta rays, eagle rays, to turtles. All sorts of animals can be identified by their markings. And you can see here the area that we're interested in. It's basically from the last gill slit, so the 5th gill slit, to the base, the very trailing edge, the last part of the pectoral fin. Left side is a priority, but if you can get both sides, then you'll get a confirmed ID of that animal. And if the animal is ever resighted and a photograph is uploaded, if you put your email in there, then you will actually receive an email telling you that your whale shark has been resighted, where, and all the pertinent details. So it's very exciting to be part of a project that you'll get updates and information from. We also use photographs of scars and distinguishing marks. So in this case, it might be, you can see the one at the top left-hand part of the screen, where the dorsal fin has been cut completely off. Unfortunately, this is another one of the threats that faces whale sharks now, with ship strikes and propeller injuries. You can also see the one at the bottom, which appears to have a white marking on it, and that's probably from a large rope or possibly a net or a piece of netting that the animal had entangled on its body for a long period of time until either it fell off or more likely was cut off by divers or swimmers in the water. And then you can see also natural scarring, which occur at the top right-hand side. This animal had a huge bite mark out of her belly. It is a female. We did identify that it was a large adult female. And we don't know what animal might have caused that. It could have been a great white when she was younger, but it did look relatively fresh. You can see the white tissue in there of the scar, and it looks relatively fresh. So that might be something like an orca, for example. So they have natural predators, but unfortunately their main enemy right now, of course, is anthropogenic, human beings. So in Galapagos, what is it that we do know about them, and what have we discovered? Firstly, that their average size is much, much bigger, double or more than the ones that you generally see elsewhere in the world. So between 12 and 14 meters. We may be underestimating them. We have a project to go out actually with a tape measure, because we've tried measuring them with laser biometrics. We realize the margin of error may be such that they're actually bigger than we're measuring. So we're planning this year to take a measuring tape. Sometimes the old techniques are the best, and we're going to physically measure one from head to tail, which is going to be an interesting experience. So they're very, very big. We don't know exactly how big they grow to, but possibly 18 meters. So they're much larger than the ones that you see around most of the Galapagos. Also, most of the ones that we see in the Galapagos are female, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. They tend to come into the Galapagos during the cool season. And initially we thought that the cold waters, which were associated with high levels of nutrients, meant that they were coming in to feed. But most of the times, and you can see from this one here in the previous picture, their mouths are closed. So in fact, they're not filter feeding when they're in the Galapagos. We've only had 2 cases in the decades that we've been studying them where they've actually had their mouths open and appear to be gulping food. Most of them, 99.9% of them, have their mouths closed and they're not feeding. So they're coming to Galapagos for another reason. But they're coming during the cool season, which runs from June till about November. And of course, they reach their heights between July, August, and September, maybe October, which is the period that we're mostly studying and diving with them. I mentioned that most of the ones that we see are actually females. I have been lucky enough to see, I think, 3 or 4 males in the entire time that I've dived in the Galapagos, thousands of dives, and they're very, very easy to distinguish apart. The males have claspers, these double penises, or double claspers if you like, and the females only have the pelvic fins, no claspers. So it's extremely easy to identify a male or a female whale shark. But the biggest surprise that we took away early on in the study is that nearly 100% of all the animals coming into the Galapagos are actually female, 99.8% at this moment. We also noticed that they appear to have very, very distended bellies, which might be suggested of the fact that they are pregnant. And that's possibly the most important question that we're trying to answer. How do you find out whether a female is actually pregnant or not? Unfortunately, this is one of the methods, or one of the ways that we found out. 2005 in Taiwan, there was a whale shark that was captured, and she was biopsied, or autopsied rather, and they discovered that she was carrying the huge number of 304 fetuses, a single female, which is a massive amount. It makes them one of the most productive of all of the sharks of the oceans, which tend to have a few pups, or maybe a few dozen, a few tens of sharks, but over 300 from probably a single mating. Because looking at the DNA of those neonates, they discovered that they seem to have all come from a single mating, from a single male. So obviously they take advantage, possibly by storing the sperm, and then with some mechanism which allows for delayed fertilization, they can actually maximize the use of that single mating event. What did the satellite tag information start to tell us? That there's connectivity between various different parts of the eastern tropical Pacific. So they often swam out along the equatorial front, the cool waters of the south and the warm waters of the north, and they would follow that. They specifically like water between 24 and 26 degrees Celsius, but there was strong connectivity between the small island ecosystems, oceanic islands of Malpelo and Cocos, and also the shelf break of northern Peru as well. So very quickly we began to discover interesting information from the satellite tags. We also have compounded or found more information about the hypothesis of magnetic orientation. We know that a lot of animals use the Earth's magnetic north and south to orient and to travel, and it seems that whale sharks are doing the same thing. But they're doing this from the surface because we have satellite data showing that they're on the surface, but they're following very, very deep oceanic magnetic features, such as this fissure. And you can't mistake this very, very strong right turn that animal took. One of the ways that we have created awareness, we were lucky enough to work with the BBC Blue Planet team when they came out to the Galapagos. We were able to go down in the submersibles, and that gave us more data about how they're traveling around. We didn't find what we were hoping to, and that's evidence of neonates that are actually in Darwin Arch or in the dive site of Darwin Arch. We hoped as we went deeper down to 300, 400, 500 meters, we might actually discover neonates. But of course, we didn't get the opportunity to go down there very often, and just a few hours spent in a submersible is not enough time to search the huge expanse of seafloor that is down there, but it was exciting indeed. We've also been able to put cameras on whale sharks, something that had not been done before, because it's not difficult to put a camera on a whale shark, it's very difficult to retrieve it, and you have to retrieve these cameras to actually get the footage back. So that was a whole adventure in itself. Just recently, we've developed another couple of techniques, and we were the first team to be able to carry out blood draw in a free swimming state. So this had been done with animals in aquariums and animals that had been caught in nets. When the fishermen called in the scientists, they were able to take blood from the animals. But in a free swimming state, we were lucky enough to be the first team to actually get blood in that state. And also the first team, and you can see here a scientist taking blood from the pelvic fin of a shark, whilst another science diver films the procedure. And here you can see putting in a small needle. The animals don't even realize that we're doing this, and then the blood samples are brought back on board for quick analysis to look at gas levels, lactate, for example, which shows the level of stress. Fortunately, we've been able to determine that they show zero stress in Galapagos, even after being tagged. We're also the first team, together with our colleagues from Okinawa, from Japan, to carry out ultrasound examinations on free swimming sharks. This is a rare event where we have two sharks crossing by. And one of the problems that we faced earlier on doing these ultrasound tests was the thickness of the skin. They have about 30 centimeters, that's about a foot of skin. It's one of the thickest skins of any animal on the planet. And so we actually had to get through that before we were able to identify any of the internal organs. And we were able to see the ovaries. And you can see here, thanks to the analysis of the Okinawa Tsurushima technicians and experts, they were able to identify egg follicles, fully developed egg follicles inside. So we could see that they were in a reproductive state, but we've not yet been able to determine whether they're carrying pups or neonates, and of course whether they're about to give birth in the Galapagos Islands. That is one of the main goals, to look at their reproductive state. And if they are indeed birthing in Galapagos, then obviously it's one of those areas that is very, very high on the list of priorities to protect. Satellite tagging, I already mentioned. There are various different tags that we put on. This is how we tag them. You put a small, what looks like a clothespin or a clip on the dorsal fin. It's not an invasive technique. The whale sharks generally don't even notice that they've been tagged. This is a splash tag that we're using. You can see it deployed on the dorsal fin, and it's very important that the antenna is up high so that it gives us the necessary data that we need. We often use, we have used in the past, hybrid tags that give us depth data as well. So we're trying to find the best techniques that work and give us the greatest amount of data from a single tagging. And you can see here what happens here. A diver is in the water. We spot a whale shark. The whale sharks, as I say, are very curious. They often turn towards us when they see us in the water, and this was exactly the case of this particular shark, who turned towards us to get a closer look. The person that is trying to get the ID on the left side at this point swims away to get a better picture. The camera person is hanging still in the water just to capture the moment. You don't move fast around whale sharks, and you just make sure that you steer clear of the tail because they're not trying to hurt you in any way, but that tail does weigh about 1.5 tons, so it could injure you if it touches you. And here you can see a tagging, so the whale shark doesn't even notice that the tag is placed very gently on the fin. The pincer or the clamp is made out of galvanized steel, so after a period of time, probably about 2 years, that simply corrodes and will fall away from the animal. We hope to get up to about 400 or maybe even 500 days from the battery life of that animal. Each time that it surfaces, a transmission will be sent up to the Argus satellite system platform, and we get a report of location and depth data as well. You see the whale shark then turns to look at the divers in the water, so not even noticing or worrying about the divers. So very quickly, we got some interesting results from the tags, which showed connectivity, as I mentioned before. It shows how they're diving around and in the Galapagos Marine Reserve of the Galapagos. This is perhaps one of the saddest events. We did tag a juvenile whale shark, a female of about 7 or 8 meters, and she went on her way. We followed her for over 200 days. She moved away into the west of the eastern tropical Pacific, and we thought at one point she was turning and returning to Galapagos, at which point we gave her the name Hope, or Esperanza in Spanish. And unfortunately, she then turned back out towards the west, and she stopped transmitting. And looking at her tag data, we did notice a sudden speed up of her apparent data as she went from about 2 to 3 knots, which is the average of a whale shark, up to about 7 or 8 knots, which would be more indicative of a fishing vessel. So we will never probably know, but you see the light grey marks that are on that map. Those denote fishing activity at that period of time, and she was in an area of very, very intense fishing. So it is quite likely, unfortunately, that she was caught by a fishing vessel in that area. And we do have evidence that, sadly, a lot of the industrial fishing vessels, particularly the ones that are Asian or Chinese flagged, are catching large numbers of sharks of every single species. It doesn't matter whether they're endangered or not. And in 2017, a vessel that was captured inside the Marine Reserve of Galapagos had 7,200 sharks on board in its hold. And amongst those was a juvenile whale shark, a male whale shark that was dismembered. What is the future of whale sharks? Well, we don't know at this moment. As I've mentioned, we need more data. We need baseline data. And with that, we can create legislation. Marine protected areas, sadly right now, only about 4% of the entire surface of the oceans is actually protected. And that is something we must change. All life on Earth came from the oceans. If we can't protect the oceans, if we can't preserve life in the oceans, and many of these species go extinct, then unfortunately life on Earth will follow. If the pandemic we've just come through isn't a loud enough message from the planet saying if you continue to treat planet Earth in this way, you will cause your own demise, the human population will go extinct. COVID was a small warning just to show us what we're doing on the planet. So we do need to protect the oceans for the future. The Galapagos Whale Shark Project is working with one species. There are many, many species that we need to look at, but it's one of those umbrella species that if we're able to protect whale sharks in their movements as they travel between ocean ecosystems or oceanic islands, such as Cocos and the Galapagos, and we can create these marine protected areas, such as the International Swimway, then of course there would be a future for the oceans. If we can't do that, there is no future. I'll talk more about perhaps those protected areas, marine protected areas, on another occasion, as I'm being told that time is running short and I'm talking too much. So thank you very much for bearing with me, for listening to what is an enormous amount of information in a very short period of time. It's an exciting project, and I know that there are some questions. But this is what the oceans should look like. Healthy oceans are the future of this planet. So if you have any questions, thank you very much. We take those now.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Yes, I think that's a lot of information. A lot of questions came up as well. So I think it might be even really a good idea to have another question and answer session in the future to go a little bit more in detail in the questions, because some of them were quite where you can talk a little bit more, and also to have some interesting stories. I would like to use the time to at least have 3 or 4 questions that we could go into. And would like to first thank you. You started over a decade ago a project that is now, helping the oceans and the whale sharks, and you keep doing it. And so very much thank you for that. And Sally did ask the question, how does someone get into this line of this work? So maybe you tell us a little bit about your way, how you started to start a project like this.
Okay, thanks. That's a question that we often get in this field. For me, it was more of an accident than planning. I trained originally in sciences as a geologist, physical geography. I was always interested in oceanography. The oceans always held a fascination for me. So before I went to the Galapagos, I was a diver and had done my diver's first stage of the instructor's ticket, for example. So I was lucky enough to be hired to work in the Galapagos Islands as a dive master. And that was when I think I was lucky to be involved in a number of studies that were going on there as a volunteer. So I worked, first of all, as a volunteer in different marine biological projects. And then it was that turning point in life when I came face to face with a whale shark and the general fascination that, because no one else was studying this particular species at that time, or very few people were studying it around the world, that I went and together with Dr. Alex Hearn, who was already studying sharks in the Galapagos, we came up with a plan and said, okay, let's study whale sharks. So it was really more of an accident or an incident. But if you're interested in marine biology, follow that path. University studies, of course, it's great to have a degree in marine biology, but practical hands-on experience, if you can volunteer with projects, and there are a bunch of projects around the world, that's a great way to start. Be prepared to spend long hours in the field, but the rewards are absolutely huge.
Thank you very much. So we have quite a lot of questions right now also coming in. I would take 2 questions and we'll answer them together. We have one question from Martin regarding travel restriction to the Galapagos Islands. And we had another question from Sally. How does someone who wants to see whale sharks in the wild find a company that is legitimate to travel with? So I would like to talk a little bit about Galapagos Shark Diving and the travel restriction. Right now, Galapagos and Ecuador decided starting on the 1st of July that the travel restriction will be the same. So you have to have your vaccination that needs to be older than 14 days so that your vaccination is valid and it's also working. Then you only show your certificate. If you don't have a certificate or you're not vaccinated, you need a test, antigen test or a PCR test that is not older than 72 hours to enter the Galapagos and to enter Ecuador. Additional to that, you have to sign obviously a form where you confirm that you do not have any COVID symptoms, and with that you're set and can travel to the Galapagos Islands. So they're open, they're waiting for you to come to enjoy the beauty that you can see. I mean, you saw a little bit in the videos, but it's just incredible. The company we created 4 years ago, Galapagos Shark Diving, to give divers like you the possibility to support conservation. So you heard from Jonathan already that there are programs like the whaleshark.org Wild Book, where we're collecting whale sharks, so you can identify every single whale shark that you're diving with, and you can follow this whale shark around the world. And these programs are for manta rays, giant manta rays. You can identify each one of them. There are whales you can identify. And for many, many endangered species, you can help everywhere you're going. If you're going diving, if you're going with whale watching, so you can do a lot to support. So we will talk about that on trips, on our dive trips that we organize. And having with us, we will donate directly to the Galapagos Whale Shark Project. So you are not only helping by helping with the citizen science program, you're also helping, obviously, financial, what a research project needs. So Galapagos Shark Diving is one option. Of course, there are other companies as well, but we would be happy if you maybe dive and travel with us one day. We do offer tours to the Galapagos Islands and also Cocos Islands. Because we didn't go too much into it, we will do next time. There's a swimway where there's a lot of talking about protection between Cocos Island and Galapagos Island. And as Jonathan mentioned, if you submit a photo, a whale shark ID photo, you can follow this whale shark, and we have proof that there is connectivity. So yeah, I could go on forever, probably, but yeah, that would be one way. So let's take one last question. Which one we take? There were so many. Maybe one for the final. Could you attach a camera to learn more about them? Maybe you tell us a little bit how easy it is, and maybe about your experiences with filming with the BBC. I think that might be interesting.
Yeah, that's, interesting questions. When we were contacted first by the BBC team, they said that they were planning to film for the Blue Planet 2 series. They asked if we would be interested in working with them. It took about a millisecond to make a decision about that. I think, like so many people probably listening today, I grew up with the voice of David Attenborough, the BBC, the Blue Planet, Life on Earth, those programs creating a level of expectation, a benchmark, if you like, of natural history documentation. So it was very exciting for us to be approached by them. But they did have specific questions. They said, we want to show something which has never been seen before. Can you do that? And I said, oh, yes, absolutely. Which, of course, whale sharks are an easy subject because they haven't really been studied a great deal. And still today, we're lacking so much information about their behavior, the why they do things, where they're doing things, and so on. So I said, yeah, there's not a problem with that. They said, okay, we also want to put a camera on a whale shark. Can you do that? I said, oh, absolutely, not a problem at all. And I was truthful in that, although we'd never done it before, because I was pretty sure we could put a camera on a whale shark. What I was very unsure about was whether or not we could get it back. But they didn't ask that, so I thought, well, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So, as I mentioned just a moment ago, it's not putting the camera on. That's very easy. So you saw the diver putting the satellite tag on, and the camera's a bigger body. It's about the size of a small loaf of bread, if you like, because it has a large flotation device. So even if the animal goes down to several hundred or even over 1,000 meters, hopefully it will come off. We had a release mechanism set between about 8 and 12 hours that it would pop off and float to the surface. But then you have to recover it. So we had a satellite tag and a VHF radio pinger on there. And then with what looks like an old-fashioned TV antenna, you simply go out and you point the antenna in that direction. You've got a general idea from the satellite tag where it might be. But the TV antenna, the Yagi antenna is what is pinpointing it. So by zooming in on the sound, you know more or less where it is. So the sound increases when the antenna is pointing directly at it. So unfortunately, we lost the first prototype that the BBC gave us. They were not very happy with that, but they came back a year later and they said, here's another one, please try not to lose it. And we had a second attempt. And what we discovered is that the uprighting mechanism on the first one possibly wasn't working. So we adjusted the uprighting mechanism and we got the second camera back. And the whole thing then just decays and falls off. So the metal structure will fall off and the rest of it will float to the surface. And then we found it about 12 miles away from the place where we tagged it. And we did capture some unique behavior of other sharks that were cleaning themselves, silky sharks in this specific film. We saw silky sharks cleaning themselves on the whale sharks, but we also recorded something which we didn't expect, and that was audio. We recorded all sorts of clickings because the underwater world is very, very noisy, particularly in areas close to reefs and rocky shorelines. But we recorded what sounded like a very, very ancient roaring sound. Now, we don't know what it is. We sent it out to different labs, audio labs around the world. 2 came back and said they have nothing on file which even can be compared to it. 1 lab came back and said it could be anthropogenic, in other words, man-made, but they were not sure. So we still don't know what it was, but it is possible that that sound was emitted from the whale shark. And if that's indeed is it, then that was the first time in 70, 80, 90 million years that the whale shark had ever been heard. So we didn't, the BBC were very excited and they actually recorded David Attenborough talking about the sound, but at the last minute we decided that until we could confirm the origin of that noise, we couldn't air it on something as big as the Blue Planet. So it was fascinating to work with them, and it was incredible to see how ingenious their engineers are coming up with ideas to film wildlife. Quite amazing. And I know that they've got lots of plans for the future too, so exciting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And maybe we can show the RAW the next time in our next live event. Maybe one more question and then we stop, because I think that is something very specific and very unique to the research project. Does the Galapagos Whale Shark Project coordinate with other whale shark research projects and shares information and data, etc.? Maybe you talk a little bit about the variety and how many projects involved.
Yeah, that's an extremely good question. For me, I think all science should be open book. It should be available to everybody. So if anyone's interested in our results, we're happy to share all the information that we come up with. The data tends to be a little specific in certain cases, so there are a few people perhaps that can analyze it. But if anyone has a project and they want to use that data, they're absolutely welcome. The Galapagos Whale Shark Project is simply the name of a team that is comprised of people from around the world. So we have people from Galapagos and Ecuador, of course, from the US, from Germany, from the UK, from New Zealand, from Switzerland, from Japan, from Australia. That team is growing. So from a very, very small group at the beginning that we just decided to get together because we had a common interest, we had scientists from around the world that have expressed an interest in joining us. And for anybody who's out there right now, not just if you're developing a deep tag, but if you have exciting ideas or you have a particular technique that you think could work with whale sharks, we'd be very interested to hear those ideas, because this is very much a cooperative effort. If we don't work together amongst scientists to help discover more about these species, if we can't come up with the data necessary, we won't get the legislation. Without the legislation, we won't have marine protected areas. And so right now we're in a race against time. We need to protect the oceans, and we need to do that as much as possible together. Great question. Great question.
Thank you very much. So the last question was if we organize trips. Yes, we do. And we do even have some last minute specials for this year because there are a few spaces open. I will put in the comments below after our talk the webpage from the science team from the Galapagos Whale Shark Project. I will put in the webpage for the tours, so from Galapagos Shark Diving, and any other question that I can see and maybe need some links. We will also try to answer a few of this question, but I think I would like to take most of it, what we did not answer today, into another session where we maybe talk a little bit about our latest updates on latest discoveries, because we couldn't really go into the deep today. I would like to do that because there are really interesting and exciting